Ivory Coast geography is comprised of three major features: plains, plateaus, and mountains, while the two farming parts of the country, the forest and savanna, divide the land. Ivory Coast is tropical along the coast and semi-arid in the far north. There are three seasons. It's warm and dry in November to March. During May it is hot and dry, and finally from June to October it's hot and wet. Ivory Coast is located in the coffee belt, which is around 15 degrees from the equator, making it an ideal place to produce cocoa. The people of Ivory Coast have taken advantage of their geographic location by using their natural resources, such as coffee, timber, and cocoa, which has been a lucrative export for the nation. There are more than 60 ethnic groups in Ivory Coast. The key ones are the Bole in the center and the Danyakoba in the west. The Bole tribe lives in the center of the country. Although this tribe is not world-renowned, they are known locally in Africa for creating different kinds of shapes and wooden sculptures. The Dan tribe can be located in the western part of Ivory Coast. One glaring aspect of this tribe is that young men must be isolated for a total of 3 months in the forest as a part of coming to age event. The Dan tend to celebrate all occasions with the use of music such as birth, death, and marriage. Another large part of Dan tribe culture are masks. Masks are worn for war, competition, and entertainment. For the most part, all ethnic groups live together in harmony. However, tension has arisen between certain groups. According to the U.S. State Department Country Report on Human Rights, differences between members of the Bole group and other ethnic groups, especially the Bete, are a major source of political tension and have erupted repeatedly into violence. One example of the growing violence in Dan Curry's article is during May and June of 2005, an estimated 123 people were killed in attacks in three villages in government-controlled Southwest, the most serious case yet of increasingly frequent fighting over cocoa-rich land. The French initially made contact with Ivory Coast in 1637. During the 18th century, Ivory Coast was invaded by two related tribes, the Ani and the Bole. In 1843, the French government signed treaties with the kings of the Grand Bassam and the Asni regions, thus placing their territories under a French protectorate. Soon after, France strengthened its control over its West African trading posts by starting on a program that would explore Ivory Coast's interior. In 1887, Lieutenant Louis Springer began a 2-year journey that explored parts of Ivory Coast. Africa was not worried with the sporadic spotting of Frenchmen. However, Africans had little knowledge of the French treaties with Ivory Coast, so many of the French were able to take authority over them. On the contrary, other leaders believed they possessed the answers to solve economic and social issues. Due to the French's deception, the indigenous people lost land and freedom. Once the French obtained the land, they soon discovered its copious amount of rare material goods. Just as the Belgian King Leopold did with the DRC's abundant amount of rubber, the French took these goods as their own. French settlers found and began cultivating cocoa, coffee, bananas, and palm oil for the export back to France. A French naval officer, Arthur Verdier, established the Compagnie des Congs, a private trading company in the 1860s. His business monopolized plantations in Ivory Coast. Arthur Verdier influenced the native group by making them dependent on one industry, which was the cultivation of cocoa and coffee. This led people to rely on plantations for production. Ivory Coast has become almost completely dependent on cocoa for their economy. Ivory Coast's first spark of independence came from the son of a Bole chief, Felix Boigny. He is considered the father of independence for Ivory Coast. In 1944, he formed the country's first agricultural union for African cocoa farmers. The cause that united people was the fact that French colonial policy favored the French plantation owners. Soon after, Felix was elected into French Parliament in Paris. This led to Felix having a strong relationship with the French government and got him appointed to be a minister. On August 7, 1960, Ivory Coast gained its independence and Felix became its first president. Independence leader Felix Boigny, who ruled Ivory Coast from 1960 until his death in 1993, issued a decree saying that land belongs to the person who cultivates it. He encouraged millions to migrate from the west and southwest, burning down swaths of virgin forest to set up cocoa farms. This had a negative impact on the already present dependence of cocoa plantations. 1/3 of their economy is based off cocoa exports, which leaves Ivory Coast at the mercy of the world market price of cocoa. Cocoa is considered one of the most unstable exports in terms of constant deviation in price.
Some factors in determining the profitability of cocoa depends on natural conditions that affect cocoa yields, such as droughts. Since the price per pound of cocoa beans has recently dropped from 64 cents to 51, farmers are making less profit, so they look for ways to cut costs. One way is by using cheap labor or even resort to slave labor. The Civil War of 2002 was due to large numbers of Christians who were converted by French missionaries. Because of the Muslim-Christian divide that splits the nation from east to west, anti-Muslim laws limited the government and created civil unrest.